03 days. Now, there's two ways to do this. They can do it in the GUI, which is the Exchange Management Console, or you can do it in the Exchange shell. A lot of people don't want to go into the shell. I usually do make these changes in the shell just because that's the way Microsoft is going, and it's not that hard, and you should learn it.
For those that have no idea what you're talking about when you say shell, what are we referring to?
Okay, so it's a GUI. It's a command line, not GUI. It's a command line interface, almost like the command prompt, but it's exclusive to Exchange management.
Right.
There are certain Exchange tools you can only do in this Exchange management shell. A lot of things that were accessible. If you're used to Exchange 03 and you go to Exchange 2007 or 2010, you're going to find some things are completely gone from the GUI, the console. That's because it's only available in the management shell.
And if you do some Googling, there's some actually good documentation on the different type of things you can do within the shell.
Oh, yeah. And that'll go, like the other day, there was what's called a content filter in Exchange. And there's one domain, they receive a lot of emails from this domain. And for whatever reason, they've got high SCL ratings, like 8 or 9. So I'm not going to raise the SCL limits to that high. I wanted to exclude this one domain from the content filter, and the only way to do that is to the shell. You can't do it to the console. So anyway, there's specific things. So
okay, real quick, Pete, and because someone is asking, what the hell is a SCL rating?
Spam confidence level.
There you go.
So the higher the number, the more likelihood, the more confident that Exchange is that it's spam. So I think by default, Exchange is set to 5. That says it's spam. That's a little low, but we'll go over that later. Every email that you get, if you look in the headers, it's going to have an SCL rating. That's how if you use Outlook and you have junk email folder, that's how spam gets. That's how messages are moved to the junk email folder from the SCL rating. But yeah, we can cover that later.
Sure.
Now, the size limits. There's sending limits and there's receiving limits, and they're in different places. So let's talk about the management console first. In the management console, you're going to go. Let's see. Let's talk about the send connector first. Now remember, it's important to know that these things can be changed. You're not going to sit down at a server and follow these instructions. You would know that it's possible by listening to this and knowing what you can and can't do, and then you probably have to look online for more detailed information.
Exactly. Please, this could be different from your environment. We're just laying down the foundation so you have an understanding. Then you do some research and apply it to your environment.
Right. So I'm in the management console, and if you're not sorry if you're not dealing with Exchange, but if you're going to be dealing with businesses, small business server, you're going to have to deal with Exchange. It's part of it. It's actually one of the best features of it. So if you want to deal with businesses, learn it. You have to. Okay, so under organization configuration, under hub transport, there's a send connector. There's a tab called send connectors. And here by default, there's going to be one send connector, and by default, if you're using small business server, it's going to say Windows SBS Internet Send followed by the server name. You click on that, and right there it's got maximum message size, and you can put a number right here. Okay, this is the send connector, meaning when you're sending out to the internet. This needs to be set. Now, don't forget, we said last week it's going to add 30%. If it's set to 10 megs, it's gonna want to be bigger because it's gonna 30% overhead. So this might be set by default to 10 megs. You try to send an 8 meg attachment, it may be blocked because of the overhead.
There you go.
And actually, now that I'm doing this, I'm finding one that was not set correctly. That should have been set. Um, okay, so you can say that. Now there's receive connectors. That's under server configuration, hub transport. These are both under hub transport. The bottom section, you've got receive connectors. If it's small business server, you're gonna have three by default. The two of them that we need to be worried about is one that's default and one that's a Windows SBS Internet Receive. The default, if you opened it, if you double click on it, is going to say, if you look at the address space, it's going to be the local domain name right there. That means that this is what it's using to send for internal mail. Okay. If you look at the one that's named Windows SBS Internet Receive, the address space for that is going to be the public address. So both of these would have to be set if you want to receive mail from both internal clients and external clients. You would set them both to whatever you wanted to set them to. And that's it for the GUI. I know it seems easy, but I've seen a lot of places where they might do one and not the other. So there's three places to change it. They might change one and not the other. Now, let me get back to my screen so I can. There we go. The console, it might be a little bit harder to navigate because you gotta do a few commands, but there's some things that are easier to check. One thing is the site connector. You can only check, I believe, through the GUI. I'm sorry, through the command line. That's usually by default set to unlimited, but I have seen administrators set this lower to try and limit something, and it kind of screws things up. So just check the form again. You'll see what I'm talking about. There's an AD site link, and that is set unlimited by default. That's fine. We can leave that. Remember, if that's limited, if this is set to 20, anything you do in the send and receive connectors won't matter, because if this AD site link is set lower, that's going to be the limiting factor. So as long as it's not lower than what you want to send, unlimited is fine.
And what Matt is further describing this, it's always good practice when you're making changes like this that you document what you're doing. In the event that something's not working as expected, you can kind of reverse the damage per se.
Definitely. That's why I kind of like the shell, because one of the first things I do in the shell is I just type git-transport config, and that shows you what everything's set to. A nice little one window. If you're in the console, you've got to go three places to three settings. I'm sorry, that's not true. You can see a lot different settings if you do git-transport config in the shell. You don't see some of that stuff in the GUI. So some of these things you may want to change, some you may not. Now we're just talking about the send and receive limits. So some of that stuff you're going to want to leave alone unless you know what it does. Now in here if you read this article, it at first looks confusing, but it's really not, because what it walks you through is, one is getting what the setting is, the next is setting it. So you get the transport config, you set the transport config. You get the AD site link, you set the AD site link. These are not very hard, and the hardest part is typing them in, really, because you've got, let's say one of them, set dash send connector name in quotes, and to get the connector name you might have to go back out to the console to see what it actually is named, because you don't type quote or connector name, you type what the actual connector name is. When you read this article, you understand. So you might have to get it, but I just prefer setting limits here. I don't know why, I just do. But basically you're going to set the same three things we set in the GUI, you're going to set in here. Now let's say the original request was, I want Mary and Bob to send 30 megs, but everyone else to stay at the default limits. We've got to raise everybody to 30, and then you limit other people. There's two ways to do this. One is you can actually use the management shell to limit the other accounts. Now, of course, this would not be reasonable if you've got any number of users, right? Because you'd have to go and type this for every user.
Right.
It also is not convenient because if else is adding accounts and you add a new account, they're going to take the default, which is 30, not the restricted, which is 10, let's say. So I don't go this route. I don't set individual mailboxes. The other way to do it is something that's pretty neat. You can create transport rules in Exchange to do a lot of different things. And if you're familiar with Exchange, go to look at the transport rules. This is under, again, Hub Transport for the organization configuration. It's a tab called Transport Rules. You can do a lot of things in here, a lot of things. The most common thing that we do is you can append company disclaimers to all outbound emails.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, like in Exchange 03, it wasn't, well, it was possible, but it was a real pain. A lot of people turn to third-party add-ons. With Exchange 07 and 2010, it's built in and it works great. You can prepend, you can append, you can do a lot of different things. There's a lot of different things in here. It's really awesome to look at that. But one thing you do is you can also limit sending and receiving emails by attachment size. So in here, you can create a new transport rule that basically says when the size of any attachment is greater than or equal to, and you can set your limit, you can go back to 10 megs here, to bounce it, basically. If it's bigger than 10, bounce it, sending or receiving.
Now that's neat because it would never hit your queue, and therefore if a user tries to send, for example, a 50 meg attachment, is not going to hose up your bots.
Right. Exactly. And you can pretty much specify what you want it to say in the bounce back to the user.
Well, that's neat.
So, and then you can also add to here, except if sent to or from, or something like that, except when the member is from a member or sent to a member of a distribution list. Okay, so what I do is, and the same thing in this example that you can post, create a distribution list called something like high-profile users, VIP email users, something like that. If you want Mary and Bob only to be able to send and receive large emails, put them in that distribution list. So now when you make your transport rule, it's except from or sent to anyone in this group.
Okay.
So they can send and receive large messages because they're in the group. Everyone else cannot.
Now that seems neat because the only thing you have to do is make sure whoever VIP, if they come and go, if there's a high turnover rate, they're just a member of that group.
That's right. So it's easy to see who's in that group and who's not to add them. It's a lot easier than going to the shell and setting each individual mailbox because, of course, someone has to remember to do that for new users.
Right. And even if you went to the GUI, and I've been, part of this when I first started, it's so difficult to manage so many users. People move on, they leave the company, and new users. And before you know it, you have all type of different rules for different mailboxes.
Right. And that's what makes it hard when you're taking over a server to know what's been going on.
Very true. So
that's the kind of thing where you would want to go to the Exchange shell, run a few commands and see what's set. So, but that transport rule, look at those. Those things are really neat. Even companies who don't necessarily want a disclaimer, when you tell them it's possible, oh, we want one. We want one. Because the user doesn't have to do anything. It just goes out on everyone.
No, and I agree. And another reason that you might say, why would you do that? Well, if you ever send a broadcast email to all your users and explain to them that your signature has to be a certain way, it didn't do it.